right, let's begin. Hello and welcome back to the channel. I have a very special guest today. We have writer, director, editor, producer, Edmund Yeo. So Edmund is a award-winning Malaysian filmmaker whose films have been screened all over the world, from the Venice Film Festival to the Tokyo International Film Festival, from Cannes to Busan. He has seen it all. Edmund, welcome to the channel and thank you very much for joining us and good morning.
Hey, Nicholas. Yeah, thanks for having me here. Good morning.
I hope you're doing well during this lockdown period in Malaysia. It's been very tough on everyone. But have you been coping well?
I'm okay. I mean, just trying to keep myself productive, finishing up my new film, having meetings for this upcoming TV project.
Amazing. Amazing. I'd like to ask a little bit about that later, maybe about your new film. But before we begin, thank you again for joining us. For the viewers who aren't as familiar, maybe you could talk a little bit about your background. So what influenced you to become a filmmaker and how was your upbringing like?
Okay. I think my upbringing had a lot to do with how I ended up becoming a filmmaker. In a way, I was born in show business.
Right.
So my father, he was a music producer. My mom was a singer before she got married. And both of them, they shared this love for cinema. So when I was born, even as a kid, I was born in Singapore, but people tend to have this misunderstanding that I was Singaporean.
Right.
But it just happened that my parents were working in Singapore when I was born. So I'm pretty much a Malaysian. Parents are Malaysian. So I moved back here to PJ when I was around 2 or 3. So we've been living in the same house at Taman Paramount for the past 30 over years.
Good to hear from another PJ boy.
Exactly, man. PJ, man. So in the late 80s, like 90s, PJ is known for its many old school cinemas, standalone big cinemas, not the multiplexes that we have in shopping malls now. So even near my house, as a kid, there was a Paramount Cinema, like this famous Paramount Cinema, which had not been, it became a supermarket.
Oh man!
So it still served the neighborhood in a way, but back then it was a neighborhood for cinema. So pretty much every week as a kid, I would go there with my parents to watch a movie, maybe a few times a week. And also my dad has this side job as a film critic. So he writes about films, and he's a film columnist. He writes for newspapers and stuff. So their love for cinema sort of, it's contagious. So it came to me, and I had this. So there were all these films that I was watching as a kid. Like the Stephen Chow films, of course, the Hong Kong films that we all grew up watching. The Hollywood stuff, the cartoons, like Disney cartoons. Now, back in the day, like Disney, they used to do like reruns of cartoons, animated films like Snow White. I remember I watched those in cinemas.
Right.
Yes, the usual Hollywood stuff. I think I became more and more. It's more like a habit, and I think as a kid, I totally loved the experience of being in this dark place, with strangers while watching this. It felt majestic, watching the big screen, things happening on the big screen. So I remember there were some films that we would watch more than once, and the feeling remained magical. So what sort of started was that I think it was 1987, 1988. Which sort of exposed my age. So I was a kid, and so I think my parents, they brought me to watch a film that they shouldn't have brought a kid to. It's called Tremors, starring Kevin Bacon. Yeah. So I was freaking out. I mean, back then they were watching films like Total Recall and
Right.
Robocop,
Action films.
Action films. They didn't really care, even though I was a kid. Even though, So I mean, my parents they were cool, and
right,
so
very cool.
Watching cameras, and I was freaking out. I was like, monsters popping out from the ground. I was like, it's like I remember I was like crying, and my mom was like, cool down. It's like calm down. It's all just some magical illusion. It's all fake. It's all done by this godly figure called a film director. So I think since then, wow, my mom spent the entire film like constructing what we saw. It's like, look at that. That's just a prop. That's probably just a fake. Those actors are probably pretending, just like how I pretend with imaginary friends. Just like you do the same with your toys. You're doing the same with like big toys. So I think that sort of wow, that's so cool. It's just a larger scale version of what I've been doing, playing with toys, like imaginary friends.
Right. Very cool indeed. Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. So I since then I just became obsessed with wanting to become a film director. I would draw. I mean, I thought I was drawing comics then. I was like, my mom would get me like those exercise books. Like, I mean, I still kept some of them. Like, I mean, so I would draw. Like, I thought they were comics, but looking back at them again, I think they were more like storyboards. I was drawing like imaginary films. So yeah. So of course we went through this. I went through like school. My high school, no, my primary school friends, my teachers, they can testify for me. Like I was the annoying one who wanted
really
to be a film director. So I'll be a film director.
Wow, I like how you had that like dream even since you were in primary school, which is amazing.
I mean, for a short few months, I wanted to be a paleontologist because of Jurassic Park.
Oh, okay. You were influenced by.
I was a dinosaur person too.
Understood. I really love.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. So it's like that. After that, I just got back into film. I mean, thankfully, my dad, he had a large collection of films. On VHS, LD, VCDs. Like so the aside from the stuff that I got to see in the cinemas, I also was exposed to other forms of like world cinema, as I was growing up, so I got to watch like Japanese anime or Japanese films like that weren't actually playing in Malaysian cinemas like back then, I got to see like a lot of like black and white classic films, so yeah, Casablanca got to win.
Very cool. So from a primary school boy who wanted to be a director, watching films at the cinemas and at home, to where you are now, right? With, a dozen or so short films and 3 to 4 feature-length films. I'm not sure if you count the Yasmin documentary as a feature, but like 3 to 4 films, right?
Working on the 4th.
Yeah, right. Got it. So, okay, let's thank you so much for telling us a bit about, your childhood and your influences in film. Let's move a little bit into your films themselves, right? I really like to talk about some of the themes in your films. I noticed some of your films have similar themes. One of them is memory, right? Or the past. And I noticed characters in your films often see their ghosts of the past appear in front of them in the scene. So could you tell us a little bit about why you chose to have this element consistently incorporated into your films?
Okay. I mean, the truth is I've never really consciously went after the same themes,
I see.
But I think what I've always been doing in the past 13, 14 years, like since I started making films, is that generally I want to work on stories that resonate to me, the inspiration that I get from from literature, or I drew it from my own memories, or it could be something that's been happening in the country like right now. So I think to make it authentic, I always had this desire to inject my own feelings into the characters. So in a way, I think I have a very Buddhist sort of upbringing. As you can see behind me, so we have all this belief of we have this very spiritual sort of thing where how I think maybe in a way I liked exploring our relationship with memories and the past in a form of ghosts, in the form of spirits.
Yeah.
I feel that maybe what the ghosts that really haunt us are not really the horror sort of ghosts, but more like things we have done in the past. So I mean, I was probably influenced by books I've read or films that I've watched back in the past. So they all accumulated and became like stories that I like to tell, because they meant something to me. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Understood. So you mentioned about the Buddhist aspect of it as well, right? And I obviously see that you are a devout Buddhist. Like, has that part of your life always been strong since you were young? And do you think that sort of subconsciously influenced your the way you approach your films, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I think it's. I mean, my family, my parents, my mom, she's a very pious Buddhist. So we practice the philosophy of Buddhism like quite. I mean, we try our best. I don't say that I'm doing it. Like I'm like hardcore Buddhist or whatever. But I think it's been part of our lives, our everyday lives for so long that I wouldn't even notice it until like someone pointed out to me the fact that there's this Zen stillness like in my films, and
yes,
the fact I explore like death and rebirth and things like that. So I'm like,
exactly.
I wouldn't notice it until someone pointed out.
That's pretty cool, because I was going to say that your films are so serene, right, and so still, like like a lot of the the Buddhist environments when you go to prayers, it has that kind of Zen feeling, as you mentioned, but there's also the conflict, right, within. There's the trauma of the past, and as you mentioned, right, the memory of the ghosts of the past might not necessarily be like the horror type, but sometimes they are
more horrifying.
Exactly. Sometimes it's just the mind, right? They're just trying to come to terms with certain things that have happened in their past. So very cool. Another thing that I also noticed in your films is that a lot of these characters, they're asking themselves, what am I doing here? I want to get out there. I want to find opportunities elsewhere, like overseas. And I think as Malaysians, like you and I, we can relate strongly to this, right? As students who went overseas. Could you tell us a little bit about what message you are trying to convey with these characters?
Yeah, I think before I turned 20, even though I have films even though I wanted to make films, I wouldn't exactly imagine I would be making the sort of films that I'm making now, due to the sort of influences that I had, growing up. I was so used to the spectacles and the comedies and Stephen Chow stuff. I think when I was 20, I went to Australia for my studies. So I was there for like 2.5 years. Then I spent another 5-6 years in Japan, in Tokyo, for my master's and PhD and all that stuff. So definitely, I think because most of my 20s, throughout my 20s, that entire decade, I wasn't really in Malaysia, and getting into films, I had the opportunity to travel quite a lot, to film festivals or for my work, So I think these were the sort of thoughts that became more and more clearer, to me, in that 10 years. What am I doing? And I think maybe there's a frame of references too. I mean, if I had stayed all my life in Malaysia, I'm very sure that I might still make films, but probably the type of films or the type of themes that I'm exploring would have been different. But being away, that it gave me a lot of distance from Malaysia, which allowed me to look at my own country in a different way. There were a lot of things that I didn't, that were around me, but I didn't really pay attention to, like the politics, like the history, because I was like, well, who cares about history? It's sejarah, it's like what we had in textbooks, but I think being away allowed me to question like what I've learned in sejarah.
Understood.
It's
like you're like a bystander, right? And you're looking at it from a third party perspective, and you can see the whole picture a little bit more clearly.
Yes. So I think it's objectivity and distance is very good for storytelling. I think in a way, So once I was exposed to the values and traditions and the governments of other countries. It gave me a frame of reference, a frame of comparison. Like, oh, my country is like that. I'm here and it's like that. Do I feel so? There were a lot of turmoil and dilemma. Like even when I wasn't in Malaysia, like I all this stuff going on in Malaysia. Per se and all these protests. I'm like, I'm here. I feel kind of bad that I'm here. I wish I were back and be part of this whole. So there was this yearning and nostalgia that I had for Malaysia that I never had growing up. So I think it helps. While being in Japan and being in Australia, I think especially in Japan, like I think the whole Zen, this stillness, this serene, the rhythms of my film. I think it had a lot to do with my time in Japan. It's definitely exposed. It's influenced by the literature and the films and the life that I had in Tokyo.
I can definitely see that in all of your films, right? Even from the earliest ones. And I noticed that as you went along and you started filming in Japan, that stillness was a bit more enhanced and emphasized, right, in your films. So very good. You mentioned going to film festivals when you were in your 20s, right? And I'd just like to pause and take note of the fact that Edmund here, guys, is one of actually the youngest Malaysian filmmaker to have his film screened at the Venice Film Festival. I'd love to know how you felt when you were in Venice for that film. How did it feel to represent the country, even though it was a Japanese film? I think it was Kingyo, right? And I was competing. So how did you feel at the time?
It was really mind-blowing. I think the thing about Malaysia is that we never really had a film festival. So film festival was a very foreign concept to me. Even growing up, despite my obsession with cinema, I didn't really know that much about film festivals. Like I've seen them on the news, like red carpet, and sometimes I saw like people winning awards and like film festivals, but I never really knew or understood like what they were. I didn't expect them to be part of what we are doing. But as a kid, I was already obsessed with Oscars and Golden Horse. Those award ceremonies, because like they are sort of it's like watching sports. You're kind of rooting for your favorite film to win. You're like, yes, Lord of the Rings. So I think all these film festivals, I only started like becoming exposed to them when I was in Australia, in Perth, because they had a lot of like film festivals going on, student film festivals. So it gradually became, and also at the time, like it was like the mid 2000s. So that was the time when many Malaysian independent or art house filmmakers like Yasmin Ahmad and such, their films started getting into film festivals. So especially Yasmin's Sepet, like it had its world premiere at the Tokyo Film Festival. It won the award at the Winds of Asia as a debut film. So it was amazing. Like even when I was in Australia, that news sort of like, I got a news. I was like, oh wow, Malaysian film won in Tokyo. That's amazing. Then all these other Malaysian directors started emerging at the same time, like James Lee, Tan Chun Hui, they call at that time they call it this whole movement, like Wu Ming Jin, the Malaysian New Wave.
Yeah.
So I think that was the time when I became more and more aware of film festivals, because films are going to places that I've never heard of. Wow, But once I started doing my research, I'm like, oh my god, like it's like an entire new world that I knew nothing about. I had these discussions with my teachers in Australia. I'm like, wow, this is happening in Malaysia right now. So again, I was like, why am I here? I wish I were back there. Being part of this movement. where I could work with these filmmakers.
Yeah.
Which I did in the end, eventually.
Yeah.
During my break, I did go back to Malaysia to meet with most of these filmmakers.
And work with them as well, right?
With them as well, especially Wu Mingjin. Still working now.
Indeed. And I think I love that when you work together with these filmmakers, you bring that objectivity from afar, whereas they bring a bit more of a local flavor, right? Since they're on the ground here, and they may know a little bit more nuance around like current events. So I think that's really cool. So thank you so much for telling us about your film festival experience.
So for Kingyo, right? So I got into Kingyo in 2009, Venice Film Festival. I mean, at that time, I really knew it was like of course, it's like the oldest film festival in the world. Like it's many of those legendary names that we know of, Ang Lee and Zhang Yimou. I mean, many of them, they had you could say that their careers sort of started there, by Lion and all this stuff. I never really expected to get into Venice, that soon. But at the time, I just started studying in Tokyo. I mean, I finished Australia. I've already started making my short films. I really met those directors, so I became aware of the film festivals. So I started knowing that, okay, once we have made our short films, we could try, our luck to submit our works to film festivals, to see where do we stand in the international stage. I mean, for me, it's not really about the glamour or becoming, the red carpet. It's not really about the glamour. It's really more about knowing whether we are good enough. Have we reached that standard yet?
Right. And it's the community as well, right? Because you're meeting so many different filmmakers from around the world.
Yes, absolutely. So going to film festivals, especially Venice, what I realized was that it's not really about I have made it. I have arrived. No. It's really more like making you realize that, wow, the world is huge. There are so many filmmakers who are amazing, from different parts of the world that I'm not exposed to, like the Middle East, Central Asia, Latin America, we never see these films in cinemas, we couldn't even really, we wouldn't even know where to look or what to look, but going to a film festival, and watching their works, I'm like, wow, I must stay consistent. I must keep on working, so that
you're inspired to keep working, right?
It's very inspiring, I think, definitely, so Kingyo was 2009. Actually, in 2007, that was my very first trip to a film festival as a film producer.
I see.
So I was representing Wu Mingjin. Thanks to his wife, he had to visit his in-laws in Japan. So he couldn't go to the Santiago Film Festival in Chile, man. So it was insane.
Wow.
Hey, man, do you want to go to Chile? I'm like, yeah. It's like
you would never pass on an opportunity to go that far, right? South America, it's exactly, right? Most Malaysians have never even set foot there.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, of course I'll go, So even though it's like a 20-hour flight, I'll go. So I went and yes, so definitely that was the very first time when I felt this strange feeling of pride. There's no cynicism, I'm like, wow, I'm representing Malaysia. I'm here with a Malaysian film and I'm showing, aspects of Malaysia, like to these audiences from half a world away, it's amazing, and I like the whole cultural exchange aspect of it, because we always have this Q&A session, after screenings where we get to interact with audiences, where they could ask us questions which part of Malaysia is that, I feel that, so curiosity, that was very inspiring. I'm like, wow, actually my country is cool,
It's pretty amazing. And I think it's great that when these international audiences see your films, it showcases an aspect of Malaysia that and even an aspect of the world that most people probably haven't been exposed to, right? Maybe they've seen bits and pieces, but not like our microculture. So, thank you very much for showing our country to an international audience. One thing that I will point out is that when the audiences see your films, they'll probably see at the end of the film, in the credits, that you wrote, directed, and edited many of your films as well. So I'd like to ask for my next question, other than for budgetary reasons, is there any other reason that you edit your own films? Not many directors I know do that.
Yeah. I mean, editing your own film is quite dangerous. I kind of had to do it out of necessity. Firstly, because yes, I've done a lot of editing. Even as aside from my own films, as a producer for Wu Mingjin's films, I also had to edit his films. Right? And I think it was self-taught editing. When I first went to Australia, I got myself this camcorder and I started shooting all sort of random stuff. So I was editing video diaries and another day in university, really boring silly stuff going to the park with my friends, or going to the zoo, or lunch with my pals, So I did a lot of those stuff. That was before 1 or 2 years before YouTube came out. The whole concept of blogging or video blogging was foreign to me. It's just I wanted to. So that's how I picked up editing. I kind of like doing it. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship. Hate because it's kind of tiring and it's repetitive. But I love it because I get to sculpt what I've shot, and that's the time when I get to discover a lot of stuff. So when I started making my films, I think because most of my films, they have a very particular rhythm and tone to it. So and a mood. So I feel that it's faster if I edit it myself. But I'm always constantly trying to look for the right editor to work with me. Someone who is more aligned with my senses. I mean, it's very hard because if this editor is more used to Hollywood filmmaking or commercials or corporate videos, they have their expertise, but it's a different set of skills. It's so it's very hard.
Understood.
I didn't really work with another editor until my last film, Malu. So I had Tina Bas. She's French. Amazing editor who had done works of Naomi Kawase, and she just won the Caesar Award a few months ago, which is the French Oscars for this amazing documentary that she was editing. While she was editing my film, she was editing the documentary. So I knew about the documentary. She was multitasking. I'm like, wow,
amazing.
That's a maestro. I learned so much looking at her, and that's what I liked. I liked working with people who are smarter than me at certain things, so that I could learn, to elevate my own game. So that's why I had to edit my own films out of necessity.
Right. I suppose there's also, as you mentioned, you say it's faster if you edit it, right? And that's true in the sense that you have the creative control over how your actual film looks. I think recent examples of people who have done this are Chloe Zhao, who also edits her own films, right? But you mentioned also that editing your own film is very dangerous. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about the dangers?
Well, as a director, you are too close to the subject, So there are many things that it's better if you have a fresh pair of eyes to look for you,
Yep.
Otherwise, there are some scenes where you remember how you shot it and you're like, oh my God, I almost died shooting this scene. There's no way I can cut it, even though in truth, in retrospect, that scene might not actually be that good, or it might not actually help with the pacing of the film. But because it was so, because it's so precious to you, you couldn't do it, or maybe because you worked so hard, worked so closely with the actors that you didn't have the heart to cut them out of the film, or remove their scenes. You're like, oh no, they tried so hard for this scene, I can't do it. So that's the danger of editing your own films.
That's fair. No, that's absolutely fair.
Yeah.
Let's move into a little bit more of a technical question, right? Since we're already on the topic of editing, you mentioned in previous interviews that you were inspired quite a lot by the films of Wong Kar-wai, right? And like you, he was a very intuitive filmmaker as well, right? Sometimes he does things very unconsciously. Sometimes he gets his actors to improvise their lines. Sometimes he decides on the story only on the day of the shoot itself. So I'd like to ask you personally, do you ever feel uncomfortable not knowing exactly how a shoot is going to look, how a shot is going to look, and what an actor is going to say, since you also have some of those characteristics?
No, not really. I mean, I know that what my sort of working style, it's quite suitable for the type of films that I make. It might be very dangerous if I'm working on, let's say, a commercial or a corporate video or music videos, because those are the type of stuff where you need to be a bit more precise and pre-planned, you know. So during those few times when I was doing this stuff, like, which is not my usual medium, yes, I would try to storyboard them or plan them like more carefully, you know, because I'm dealing with a different set of people. But when it comes to films or short films, yes, I mean, Wong Kar-wai films were something that I gradually grew to admire and appreciate as I got older. I mean, growing up, I was so used to, when it comes to Hong Kong cinema, you know, I'm more used to the Zhao Xingqi and the Stephen Chow and the Jackie Chan stuff, you know. So the Wong Kar-wai stuff, as a 12, 13-year-old kid, you know, watching Wong Kar-wai stuff, I was like, what's going on, you know? Like Fallen Angels, I was expecting an action film, you know, just to see a poster of Freedom on Live, 2 guns, you know, like dope building, like where's the action scene, you know? So, but I think, yeah, you need to suffer heartbreak or isolation or loneliness to really appreciate films about isolation, loneliness, and heartbreak, you know. So in college, you know, in other countries, once I started staying in foreign countries, maybe that was the time when I started picking up like films that are more art house, you know, more auteur cinema. So Wong Kar-wai films was one of them. And yes, I find this process very refreshing to read about. I think, yeah, in a way, because I'm not a very, I mean, there are quite a lot of filmmakers who work like that, like where, you know, like Hong Sang-soo, Nuri Buji Ceylon, like what really inspired me was that, for example, like Ceylon, a great Turkish master filmmaker, you know, his films are very beautifully composed and very beautifully, you know, staged. Well, I remember like attending his Q&A session in the Dubai Film Festival, like 2011 to 2012. What he said was like, I don't storyboard. Once he said that, I'm like, you know, yes, I'm, you know, in a way, because for him, it limited his creativity. Because like he didn't want to set up all this limited. I mean, for him, it's a limitation. Like, you know, once I drew them out, I have to start following these things. You know, it gave him or me like less space to explore. You know, so and in a way, I think working with Japanese film actors, you know, it made me adopt this looser approach of filmmaking. Just Japanese, I have quite a few Japanese films, and you know, like but it's not my main language. In fact, like I'm not that good in Japanese.
I see.
So even when I did Kingyo, you know, 2009 and stuff, like I wrote a script in English. It was translated into Japanese by my producers. But when I met my actors, you know, I said that firstly, this is just a guideline, you know, it shouldn't be the Bible. I don't want you to memorize every single line. Like, if it doesn't make sense, if it feels un-Japanese, you feel that, you know, it goes against, you know, your logic or how you live life, please tell me, because I don't want people to be laughing at
right.
at a film. You know, it's like, you know, like some
Yeah.
foreign film trying to capture our everyday lives. Are you kidding me? So these are the mistakes that I tried avoiding, and I think in a way I brought it back with me. Like even though I would write my scripts, but I would tell them, my actors, like, please don't memorize the lines. Like, I don't want it to be too rigid. I don't want some things, they sound nice when it's written out, but it will probably sound unnatural in real life. So that's the reason why we rehearse, we go through these lines. Like, if there's anything wrong, please tell me. I wanted this to be a collaborative, creative session. So it has to be collaborative. Like the actors, I'm like, I'm sorry, but you guys have to be more like aware of these things. Like, I'm not just gonna tell you to recite your lines and so it's better if you to tell me, like, this doesn't make sense. There's no way my character would speak like that. So
understood. And did you speak to them in Japanese?
Not much.
Okay.
I always had a translator with me. So but Japan or even in Malaysia, I think my approach was the same. Like, like, my script should never be the guideline. Otherwise it's restrictive, and we are doing something creative. Like we should be exploring and finding ways that are even better than what we have on paper.
No, I appreciate that. And to be honest, like I think it definitely works for certain directors, right? Because what I'm surprised at is that the shots in your films look so gorgeous, even though you're talking about all these like intuitive stuff and you have no storyboards. And I've heard you say before that sometimes the shots are only decided like when you actually get to the location and not before, right? So I'm surprised how you can achieve such mastery of the image even without that pre-planning. So what you're saying makes sense. You kind of don't limit your creativity when you don't when you're not bound to like a storyboard or a plan. So fair enough.
It's just my own working style. I would say that kids don't try this at home. If it's better for them to work with a storyboard, I would still say that it's better to be more planned and more precise in the filmmaking like that. If it doesn't help you much, then yes, you can try to be more intuitive and such.
Amazing. One last thing that I wanted to ask you, Edmund, because I know we're a little bit over time now. You mentioned sorry?
No, is there a time limit?
No, yeah. I told you 45 minutes. So I didn't want to break my promise to you.
Yes,
no, but I appreciate your time, honestly. You mentioned previously that, when you're going to all these film festivals, it was your chance to see films that will never be screened in Malaysian cinemas. And I think one very unique characteristic about your work is that your features, at least, have never been screened in Malaysian cinemas either. And that's a shame, I think. And that's why I really admire your quote from before, right? How like you being further away from Malaysia helped you be more curious about the country's like political situation and like the socio-economic situation and so on. So I'd like to ask you, why do you think your films are not as supported in Malaysia? And how do you feel about that?
Okay. So the truth is, it's very tough. Like, of course, like everyone, I would always, I wish my film was shown here too. Like seen on a big screen.
Same.
Appreciated by normal like audiences. But I think in a way, I have to accept the fact that our film culture is very different from other countries. The lack of filmmaking, the lack of film festival is one. Film festivals, like Singapore, like our neighboring countries, Thailand, Philippines, they have like tons of film festivals. Like Philippines, they have tons of film festivals in every single city. Singapore International Film Festival has been around for like almost 30 years. So I think audiences are more exposed to the sort of cinema that they don't see in the multiplex. So they are more accepting of things that they're not familiar with. I'm not really condemning what we have here. It's just more like a statement. Like, we have an education system where we were not really taught to appreciate the arts or the culture, because our education system is more about getting A's and getting I don't know, like our values are more about becoming rich and becoming someone who serves society. That's more. They were more like the things that we value above others. I don't think that's good or bad. I don't think being a filmmaker makes me holier and greater than the others. It's just that it happens that we have our film culture is like this. So we have a huge appreciation for Hollywood films and Hong Kong cinema in a way that you won't even see in other countries. I'm not saying that we are obsessed with foreign. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think in a way that's the reason why Hollywood. I think we are like one of the top 20 markets for Hollywood films. We are like a
really
market. Yeah.
Like, we're such a small country, like top 20. Really?
Yep. Because as you can see, like the discrepancy between the box office of Hollywood films, like huge films like those Marvel films, they could make like nearly 100 million ringgit, 70, 100 million ringgit. Wow. Even if it's a local film that's considered a hit, they're more like 4 or 5 million ringgit. So that's a huge difference. So it's not really. So I think that it's more like a taste, a moviegoer's taste. Like these are the sort of stuff that you're more exposed to as a kid. Cinema is more like and it's more for entertainment. It's more like passing time, getting a lot of friends to watch you. So we can't. So cinema is not really like art or literature here. I mean, art is like a dirty word in Malaysia. Literature is something that why would I want to read? I only read my textbooks.
Yep. When we were young, there was the science stream and the art stream, right? In school.
So the science stream and the art stream, I think in a way is quite damaging for people's perception of art, because like, does that mean that academically you're not as good, so you go to art stream? I mean, I was sort of in a art stream too, but I had a lot of classmates who went there by choice. It's like they got like 6 or 7 or 8 A's for their PMR, but they chose art streams instead of science. But sadly, society, the general perception of art is that it's the lesser of the two, which I think was something that was cultivated by our education system. So with such an education system, and perhaps by the lack of I'm not going to condemn the film education that we have in colleges and such, but it's also like I know there are a lot of like really cool film lecturers that I met, in Unimas, in Hanxing, in New Era, with very passionate lecturers who try to educate their students with world cinema. But that's the exception, and it's not really the rule. So I think even when you study film, you can only pick up the technical aspects of filmmaking, and when you look at technical aspects, perhaps you would be appreciating more of the Hollywood stuff, and now maybe Koreans, because technically they are top notch. It's undeniable. Like so, if your focus is more on the technical aspects of filmmaking, definitely these are the films that you look up to. These are the films that you appreciate more. If you're used to pop music or rock, or hip hop, I think you might not be that used to jazz music. I think that's something like that. If you like nasi lemak, or maybe you live in the desert. Though even if I make a really nice barbecue dish, I mean, I think you probably prefer ice cream. So I think it's more like a necessity. So yes, so unfortunately, because of such an environment, not the sort of so my films are not the sort of films that can really easily go to cinemas. I mean, my first film, Durians, it didn't really pass censorship because it explored a lot of what they would say anti-establishment, because it was a critic on our education system and society in general, which is not something that you should do in cinema here, in films here. So I mean, my other films, they did pass censorship. Aqerat, Malu, they did. It's just that I know that even if they go to cinemas, it's not the sort of films that, for many people, they don't think that they are the sort of films that should go to cinema. So yes, so ironically, these films that I've made, they did get their theatrical distribution like overseas. Malu had Japanese theatrical release like late last year. I mean, Aqerat was in Taiwan. It was in it was in Switzerland and such. But I think Malaysia, it's it's
Yeah,
the way it is.
It's a shame. It's a shame. You said something earlier that I thought I related to as well. I think as young people in Malaysia, we're not taught to see film and cinema as something that makes a lot of money, or something that is, serving society, like the science stream that you mentioned earlier, right? In inverted commas. So I think that's what we are trying to change, right? I think that's people like you are helping to change that narrative a little bit. So again, thank you for your work. Also, I was also going to mention about the river exploding durians as a critique of the establishment. I really like that statement you made, right? Because you made that movie in 2014, right? Around 2013, 2014. And then, I'm sure that was a critique of like the Linus plant that was coming up around the time, right? But what was scary was that 5 years later, we had the Pasir Gudang incident. I think that your film sort of projected or predicted the future events. So I think that your films definitely should be on the big screen. I hope to see them on the big screen in Malaysia one day. So here's hoping. Yeah, hopefully. So maybe before we close, one last question. I wanted to ask this from the beginning, but is there anything at all you can tell us about your next project, your latest film? If you can share as much as you can, it's okay. I understand.
The news came out in May, so it's pretty much a public knowledge. So I was in Japan back in December to shoot my new film. So shooting a film during COVID times is kind of tricky. It was mind-blowing that I could even leave the country like late last year. So my new film is called Moonlight Shadow. It's actually an adaptation of a novella by the Japanese writer Banana Yoshimoto. So the book was written in the mid 80s, but I've updated it for contemporary times. So the past few months, like since I've shot the film, I've been editing and working on the post-production remotely. So the post-production, the sound mixing, the color grading is happening in Thailand right now as we are talking. It's tricky, but the film is supposed to come out in cinema, Japanese cinemas in September. Stars like some of the biggest names in Japan. Nana Komatsu, who was in Martin Scorsese's Silence. She's this girl who, I don't want to spoil Silence if you haven't seen it. So that's Miyazawa Hiro. So it's a story about a girl exploring, a journey through grief. Who fell in love, and then the guy died in an accident, and so it's how she could learn to let go, and it's a surrealistic journey. So there were some things that we discussed just now: spirits, ghosts in the form of memories appearing. So things that I explored in the past, they are in this film too. Still working on it.
Any chance we'll get to see them in Malaysian cinemas at all?
I hope so. I never say never.
Okay.
It's quite different from my previous films. I like exploring new things.
Right.
Nothing
What-
they can really censor.
Yeah. Well, all the best for that. Fingers crossed that
Thanks.
we will get to see it at least one day in Malaysian cinemas. So Edmund, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you talking through your filmography and your experiences. And it's been a wonderful hour speaking with you. So I'd like to wish you the best for your upcoming film. Thank you again.